Everyone. Welcome, everyone. My name is Philip Jessup, and I'm your host today, and I'm a member of TFN's Board and Lecture Committee. We here at TFN hope your fall has been full of adventures in nature. It's certainly been a beautiful one. Before we get started, let's begin by acknowledging the land and the people of the land. Toronto Field Naturalist wishes to acknowledge its land through which we walk. For thousands of years, the land has been shared by the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe. Toronto is situated on the land within the Toronto Purchase. Treaty 13, the traditional and treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is also part of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum, a covenant agreement between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, and allied peoples who share the land and all its resources. Today, the land is home to the peoples of numerous nations. We're all grateful to have the opportunity to continue to care for and share the beauty of this land. Thanks very much to the whole lecture team for organizing our lecture series this fall and coming winter, spring, including today's lecture on raptors, hawks, and their migration patterns presented by Catherine Manschot. I'll introduce Catherine in a minute, but here's just a little background to get you started. The word raptor comes from the Latin word rapere or rapere, which means to seize or plunder, an apt way to describe birds that swoop down and snatch their prey. There are many types of raptors. Today, our lecture is going to focus on one group, in particular the hawks, their physical characteristics, migration patterns, and factors affecting their population. Hawks tend to be loosely defined and are often interchanged with the word raptor, even though they are somewhat different. Our presenter will also touch on other well-known raptors such as eagles, kestrels, ospreys, and turkey vultures. The lecture will address why some hawks migrate while others do not, why migration flyovers occur in greater numbers in certain areas. And the presentation also provides information on why we count raptors at hawkwatches across North America. This is what Catherine's specialty is, and what we've learned from those counts in terms of species health. But before we start, let me just welcome all of you who are joining us today. This event will be shared on several social media channels aside from our TFN website. And please share in the chat how you heard about it. We hope you'll all come again, and we hope you'll join us as members of Toronto Field Naturalists. Before we get started, let me just share a few Zoom tips. We are recording this event, and the recording will be available online via TFN's website and YouTube channel in the future. It's a good habit to keep yourself muted unless you're about to ask a question during the Q&A session. We can also turn off our videos, especially if we plan to be moving around. It reduces distractions for all of us. We will have a Q&A afterwards, and for our Zoom audience, you have several ways to ask a question. If you have your video on and if we can see your name, then you can just raise your hand like this, the old-fashioned way, and keep waving it around. There's also a raise hand feature in the menu, and you can find it by clicking on reactions. Finally, you can also type your question in the chat feature. Ellen will keep track of those and will pose questions later, subject to our time. Now, I'm really delighted to introduce today's speaker, Catherine Manschot, who works with the Niagara Peninsula Hawkwatch Committee. Since retiring from teaching in 2017, Catherine has become an avid birder. In addition to serving on the Niagara Peninsula Hawkwatch Committee, she's a certified bird bander, a volunteer at Long Point Bird Observatory each spring and fall, and she runs a monitoring avian productivity and survivorship program banding station during the summer months in the Hamilton, Burlington area. As well, she is a bird walk guide at the Royal Botanical Gardens throughout the year. So you're going to want to log on to their website and get on one of those walks with her. Okay, Catherine, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you very much, Philip. I'm delighted to be here today to share some tips and interesting things about hawk migration and hawk counting and the issues surrounding conservation of raptors. So I'm going to begin with this slide here. You can see here the red-tailed hawk, which is basically our quintessential hawk that we are most familiar with, the one we see the most. And the title of this presentation, Hawk Migration and Hawk Counting at Beamer Conservation Area. But I should mention that I will be touching on how Beamer Conservation Area hawk counting is part of the larger picture of hawk counting in North America. So to begin, I want to walk you through the sections of my presentation today. So firstly, I'm going to talk about what is a hawk. Why do they migrate? Why do we get so many in particular at Beamer Conservation Area? Why in general, in other words, is Beamer Conservation a good place to count hawks? And then I'm going to talk about the hawk species and just some interesting adaptations that occur amongst hawk species. And finally, why do we count them? So the first thing I should mention, sorry, I'm just going to move this top bar out of the way so I can see my slides better. There we go. What are hawks? So hawks are raptors, and raptors are in two categories, diurnal and nocturnal. But mostly when people think of raptors, they think of these guys, right? The basketball players. But that's not what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about these guys, which are diurnal raptors, which are birds of prey. And these are birds of prey that hunt during the day and are called diurnal raptors as opposed to the nocturnal ones, which we tend to think of as owls. There are four characteristics that define what a raptor is. They all eat meat, and of course that can vary from insects, which is a large part of this particular raptor here, rodents, birds, amphibians, reptiles, fish, carrion, or even a small goat, depending on the size and the prey interest for a particular raptor predator. So this one we have is the American kestrel. It's a beautiful male, and it is in the genus Falcon, okay? But as Philip already mentioned, that we often interchange raptor with hawks. Hawks is kind of a colloquial term that some people refer to when they're talking about like a hawkwatch. It just rolls off the tongue better than saying diurnal raptor watch, right? Just a hawk watch. And it sort of embodies the ideas of raptors in general. So the first characteristic is that they all eat meat. This little guy here is only about 8 to 10 inches tall with a wingspan of about 2 feet wide. And he weighs between 3 and 5 ounces. And you can see this one is dining out on a little mouse. Okay, the second thing a raptor has is incredible eyesight to find its prey. Here you see the beautiful American goshawk face. They have very large eyes, and they take up about a third of the skull area. And the retinas contain many cone receptors that dramatically improve their vision. In general, their visual acuity is 12 times greater than ours on average. But some of the larger raptors can actually see a rabbit 2 kilometers away. And almost all raptors have what is called the supraorbital ridge. You can see that it's kind of like the white eyebrow here on this American goshawk. So it's a bony ridge that protects the eye from the sun and shades their eyes as well. And it also, of course, gives them that very fierce look. The third thing is they have hooked beaks. The hooked beaks allow raptors to tear meat off of their prey. They don't have hands like us, of course, because they have wings. So they really have their feet and their beak to dispatch their prey and eat it. And of course, they have very strong curved talons, as you can see here in this golden eagle. He's spreading out his talons to seize his prey. And as Philip mentioned, it comes from the Latin word rapere, to seize, and that's where the word raptor came from. Why do many birds migrate? So it's not just raptors that migrate. As you know, there are lots of birds that we get in the summer that just disappear in the winter. I mean, a few hundred years ago, they had absolutely no idea where they went. And there were all kinds of crazy theories about where they went. Oh, they went in the mud, or they would hide up in trees, all kinds of things like that, until we learned more about where they migrate. And why do they do migration? It's basically driven by food. So in their southern wintering habitats, they have to compete with a lot of other species. There's a lot of biodiversity in Central and South America. So they're competing with many more animals to eat. And when they come up here, we get in the spring this massive insect influx, and that provides a lot of food for songbirds and of course then raptors who feed on birds and other small mammals. So food is a huge driving force, and the other one, of course, is their nesting locations. Excuse me 1 minute. Again, more nesting locations available here because there's less biodiversity to compete with. And of course, we have more daylight hours in our summer, so there's more time for them to capture food and feed their young. But by and large, it's the food that drives them here. And so why do we get so many raptors specifically over Beamer? Every spring, we get approximately 12,000 raptors flying over that we count. And to answer that question, we have to talk about how raptors fly. They have three options. They can flap their wings, they can soar, which you can see this rough-legged hawk is currently doing. And this one here is the red-tailed hawk, and this one is gliding. Now you can see here how he's bending his wings in. So this spot where I've got my arrow is where the wrist or the hand is. So if you look at that spot, it's not the elbow. People often think it's the elbow because they use the human body as their reference, but really the hand is this spot here, or the carpal area, and it is holding these 10 primaries are attached to the hand. And then here is the ulna, which is the bone between the hand and the elbow. And that's this whole area here. And the shoulder is really located inside, more or less inside the body of the raptor, not like us where our shoulders are sitting outside of our main frame. So their structure is different. So anyway, so when the glide occurs, what they're doing is they're pulling their hands forward and tucking their wings closer to their body. And as a result, when they glide, they lose altitude because the wings aren't spread open nicely like when they are in a soar. Okay, so those are the three options that a raptor can use in flight. And essentially, they want to conserve energy whenever possible, and flapping requires a lot of energy. And when you're migrating, of course, you want to conserve as much energy as possible because you're flying long distances. So let me show you what this looks like when they soar and glide, because this is the way they can travel distance without flapping. So soaring can occur on a thermal, which you're seeing on the bird on the left, and it can also occur on what's called an updraft. So if you see this bird here on the left, soaring on a thermal, so heat is rising off of this ground, which is like either could be cement, pavement, rocks, but not forest that would absorb the heat more effectively. And that heat is rising, and then this bird is circling on that rising pocket of air to gain altitude. Then what the bird does is it goes into a glide. So during the glide, it will lose altitude because the wings aren't open as much and there's no rising pocket of air. But at the same time, the bird can cross distance. And then what the bird does is looks for another way to gain altitude again. And here on, say, for example, the Niagara Escarpment, where we would get updrafts off of a lake, the winds are pushing up, and the bird is utilizing that lift of wind and gaining altitude once again. So essentially, this bird has gone from one side of my slide to the other with not flapping its wings at all, but it has effectively crossed distance. So that's what raptors like to do when they migrate. And of course, as a result, they don't really like to fly over lakes because there are no thermals and updrafts. There are wind currents along the low part of near the water where the waves are, but they're not designed to use that as a way of crossing distance like you would for example, an albatross. But so these hawks would be looking for a southerly wind in the spring, so wind coming from the south, moving them north. And what happens is and if the wind is a little bit from the east, it's pushing them towards the lakes, but they don't want to go over the lakes. So they start to sort of congregate along the edges of lakes. And you can see here, this is where Beamer Conservation Area is located. What happens is they get to sort of the Buffalo area, and there's a leading line approaching them, which a leading line is a term we use for like a high ridge that would attract raptors because they're thinking, oh, there might be some updrafts that I can utilize to cross more distance. And then what they do is they turn the corner and end up along the edge of the Niagara Escarpment, which is where Beamer Conservation is located. Now, some of these birds won't turn the corner and they'll go along the southern edge of Lake Ontario, but there are other hawkwatches in the States, like Braddock Bay, which is somewhere around the word area here. And those birds would be captured on their hawkwatch and count. So Beamer is located between two water bodies, and the escarpment is a great place to find both thermals and updrafts to carry these raptors along. So I'm going to go over some of the species that we see. So what kind of, let me just move this bar, hawk species do we see? So again, using the term hawk loosely, when we talk about raptors, we're talking about several genus or genera, groups of species, and eagles each have their own genus. So the bald eagle is in one genus, and the golden eagle, I believe, is in another genus, but they are both considered eagles. And the bald eagle here on the left and the golden eagle here on the right. So an eagle is a very big raptor. Some interesting factors about them is it takes about 4 to 6 years for them to reach adulthood. So you might see a bald eagle that doesn't look like this at all because they don't get the white head and white tail till about the 4th or 5th year in life. But you'll see them in sort of patchy colors of black or brown and white preceding this final mature plumage. And their prey is quite varied. These are just some statistics about these birds. Generally, their weight can range anything from 4 pounds to 14 pounds for an eagle. The golden eagle starts at a bigger weight at 6 pounds and up to 14 pounds. And their wingspans can be greater than 7 feet wide. So pretty big birds. And they can reach almost 3 feet in height when they're perched, if you're measuring from the top of their head to the end of their tail. Here's another group. These are the falcons. We have the American kestrel here on the left. In the middle is the merlin, and on the right is the peregrine falcon. These birds all have long, pointy wings, which means they don't get a lot of drag when they're flying. And it also offers them exceptional maneuverability and, of course, speed. And they chase, their strategy for capture is to chase, capture, and dispatch their prey, typically in the air. And a peregrine falcon is famous for what's called its stoop. Remember, I was mentioning that this bend in the wing here is where the carpal area is, the wrist, and it will pull those wrists right up forward, tighten its wings right up against its body, and go into a full stoop. So it just like plummets in speed to zero in on its prey, and the speed can reach over 350 kilometers per hour. So one of the really cool, couple of the really cool adaptations these birds have to accommodate their speed is this here. So right now, this we're looking here is a merlin, and on the right is the American kestrel. And you can see here is what they call the tomial tooth. And it's sort of like a divot in the beak, and it sits in the cutout on the bottom mandible, bottom part of the beak, the lower mandible. And when it catches its prey with its talons, it will take the beak and dispatch it by snapping the spinal cord. It also has these things here, which is little baffles in their nostrils, and that's to prevent that huge influx of fast air entering their system at immense speeds, which could be detrimental to them. They also have these cool sort of skin formations that's yellow or orange in the case of the kestrel around their big, huge eyes, which separates them from other raptor species. They have those. And here are two other interesting hawks or raptors. They each have their own genus. One is the northern harrier on the left, and on the right, we're seeing an osprey. The northern harrier, we only have one subspecies of harrier here, but if you go to the old world, there are a lot more types of harriers. And what's really interesting about this species is they have a facial disc like an owl right here. And that's because they prey on mammals on the ground here or birds. And they need not only the really good eyesight, but they need to be able to hear them just ruffling around in the grasses because they're in marshes and grasslands where they predate. And they also have, of course, these long legs in order to grab their prey out of the long grasses. So beautiful adaptations for this bird. And then the osprey has really long, narrow wings and a shortish tail. And that's because they spend a lot of time over water. So they want to have nice long wings to help them fly over areas without thermals and updrafts. And they're a fish specialist. To be specific about that, highly accurate, more accurate about it, they're a fish obligate species. They they must have fish to live. So they must have open water in order to hunt. There are a couple of other really cool features I want to share with you about ospreys. namely about their talons and the toe adaptations here. They have long, rounded talons. They're particularly round here, and they act like 8 fish hooks you can see on the bird here on the right. And the toes are double jointed. So in fact, they can really hyper flex those toes out in order to grab sort of a fish that is wide in the body and hook those talons in. The feet have spicules on them. So kind of like little spiny pads, and that's also to help grab a slippery fish. And one toe, this toe on the side here, can swivel to the back. Fancy word for that is zygodactyl. And it's also so that they can reorient a large fish so that it is aerodynamic when they fly away with it. So they can have 2 sets of talons on each side of the fish. And I've seen an osprey reorient the fish so it's easier for it to fly away with that fish. And then it'll take it over to a perch and eat it there. All right, the turkey vulture. So this is also a raptor. The only exception in terms of the definition is that it doesn't have talons to seize its prey in the same way that other raptors do. So they can't grab their prey and fly off with it. They have to eat their prey in situ. But that seems not to be a problem because they eat carrion. It only makes them vulnerable when they're eating roadkill because they can't drag it off to the side. They are a featherless head bird, which in some cases, some people might think, that's kind of an ugly bird. But I think of them as functionally beautiful because of their very cool adaptations, once again, and their role in the environment. They have these very large nostrils, which and an excellent sense of smell. The olfactory smell glands inside of the body here are phenomenal. They can smell a dead mouse a kilometer from up in the sky through a forest canopy and zone down into the forest to grab that carrion. And the fact that they're eating carrion provides an excellent sanitation service to our environment, hence why I say functionally beautiful. Their head can, go into a carcass and clean it out, get everything out. And their stomachs contains a powerful acid that destroys harmful substances found in dead animals like pathogens. So they are reducing the spread of disease. Then we have what are called the bootios. Bootios is a group, a genus that includes 4 species in North America, and they are the red-tailed hawk, the red-shouldered hawk, the rough-legged hawk, and the broad-winged hawk. So the first 2 here are the red-tail and the red-shouldered hawks. What all bootios have in common in this genus is that they have broad wings. And what I mean by broad is not necessarily the length, but the width of the wing. So from the leading edge of the wing to the trailing edge is quite wide. Okay, that's what we mean when we say broad wings. Especially look at this red-tailed hawk. It has like what we call the secondary bulge. These are the feathers here that are attached to the ulna between the wrist and the elbow. And there are all these secondaries that are attached there, and they are quite long. So you get this, what we call the secondary bulge. They typically hunt by soaring overhead and pouncing on prey found on the ground. So they eat rodents, chipmunks, squirrels, that type of thing. Here are the other 2, our rough-legged hawk, which is adapted to colder climates, and they tend to breed in the Arctic. And interestingly, we see them more here in the winter because the Great Lakes area is sort of the top of their winter range. So we see them in the winter, and of course in the United States as well. The broad-winged hawk is the smallest one in this genus of bootios. And unlike other raptor species in the east, the broad-winged hawks will migrate together and form what we call kettles. So this is what a kettle looks like. It's when you see a whole bunch of broad-winged hawks fly overhead, and they often form these kettles, and then when they go into a glide, they're kind of streaming in long lines, and it's an easier way to count them. But sometimes we're not privy to when they go in a glide, and we have to count them while they're soaring in a circle like this, which is quite challenging. Every spring at Beamer, we get about 2,500 of them. And interestingly, 1,000 of them can be coming through in just one day. So that's a very exciting day to be counting hawks. And of course, there's always the exercise of Where's Waldo, if you're familiar with that set of book series for children. You're looking for that hawk in there that looks just a little bit different. And it's like, oh, I found a sharp-shinned hawk in there. Put that in the count. That kind of thing can happen. They're exciting days when they come. And speaking of a sharp-shinned hawk, this is another genus of hawks that we have. I call them the stealthy accipiters. And the accipiters use the element of surprise to capture their prey. On the left is our sharp-shinned hawk, which is the smallest of the three. Mid-size is our Cooper's hawk. And then, of course, the big, bulkiest one we have is the American goshawk. So they hunt small mammals and birds using the element of surprise. They have short wings and longish tails, and that makes them highly maneuverable in a different way than how falcons do it with their pointy wings. Because they have these long tails, they function kind of like a rudder, and with the shorter wingspan, they can go zigzagging through the forest and not hit too many branches because of the shorter wingspan, and then bend their tail each way to help maneuver them to capture their prey. You might be familiar with the sharp-shinned hawks and the Cooper's hawks because they've adapted quite well to suburban areas and hunt off of bird feeders. So this Cooper's hawk in the middle here is just waiting for the perfect opportunity to swoop in and grab something off a bird feeder. And this sharp-shinned is looking so bold that he's just sitting right on top of the bird feeder. And then, of course, the American goshawk we don't see because as it's very rare to see them because they are highly secretive and they breed in very large tracts of mature forest. So here is Beamer. Just going to move. So why do we count them? Which was the fifth section I wanted to talk about in my presentation. The counting. So at Beamer, we have citizen science volunteers, and they count every day from March 1st to May 15th. We are very fortunate that that's been occurring for over 50 years now. So we have fantastic population trends, which is highly useful for science and conservation. And why do we do this? Number one is because we love raptors, of course. We're, fascinated by them. They're amazing creatures. And of course, we're trying to capture population trends to make sure that these birds are conserved. This is one of my favorite birds, I have to admit, the rough-legged hawk. Who could not fall in love with the look of this bird right here looking straight at us? Raptors are indicators of healthy ecosystems. So it's not only to protect and conserve them, but they function as an apex predator at the top of the food chain. So if they're not doing well, we have to ask ourselves, well, what's wrong with the food chain? And also that means the ecosystems in which they live in, and raptors live in different ecosystems, so they can be indicators of the health of a variety of different ecosystems like forests, grasslands, and marshes, mountains, and tundras, because they prey on specific um, food groups that live in different ecosystems, and they have adaptations, as you've seen, to function well in those different ecosystems. So Beamer is one of 200 different count sites all over North America. And all of our data, every day that a hawk watch counter counts, an official count goes into the hawkcount.org on an hourly basis. We put in our numbers and what we're seeing and when we're seeing it. And all of that data goes into there. And then Humana, which is also an organization, Hawk Migration Association of North America, and they take all of that information and create a raptor population index. So they're looking at all that information to see what is the health of these birds and what implications that means if they're not doing well, for example. So if you go to their website, you can actually go to hawkcount.org and look that up and see any of the data of any of these hawkwatches. It's all available to the public. And then you can go to the Humana website and look at the raptor population index, and you'll see the story for every hawk species or raptor species. So what I've done is I've just cut and pasted the basic information of the ones that are doing quite well. And then the next slide are the ones that are of concern. So these are the ones that are on the rise, like the bald eagle. And of course, a lot of that has to do with a changing attitude about them in terms of, people shooting them, thinking they're, a pest, which happened for a while. And of course, the DDT issue really took a hard toll on them. But since we've eradicated that, they've bounced back, and they've even come off the species of concern in Ontario and many other areas in North America. So they're doing wonderfully well, and it's a happy story that we can all celebrate. Turkey vultures are increasing. I'm going to go over that in a little more detail as an example. Black vulture is doing well, and the peregrine falcon is also doing well. Here are some that are of concern. So the red ones are the ones that are of high concern, and the yellow is we're seeing some drops, but they're not as severe as these other four. The sharp-shinned hawk, the northern goshawk, the rough-legged hawk, and the kestrel. So I'm sure you can appreciate now from what we've been speaking, what I've been talking about, is that each raptor species has a unique combination of hunting methods, breeding needs, and food requirements in particular habitats. So their stories are each different, and they are affected differently by human activities as a result of their unique needs. So they each have a different story to tell. So what I want to do is talk to you about two stories by focusing on two species. So the turkey vulture is the first one I'm going to talk to you about. And that population range, interestingly, for this species has been expanding and moving north. Why is that? First of all, scientists believe it has a lot to do with climate change and an increase in the population of deer, which is also due to climate change, and therefore more carrion. So for example, we're starting to see some of these turkey vultures stick around even through our winter. Like in the Dundas area, we have them all year round now. That's just like in the last few years. And part of that might be because if a deer dies from starvation or disease or something in the winter, not by predation, and just dies. It's frozen in winter. And then say there's a warm spell and it starts to defrost. Well, it's going to start smelling, right? And that's going to bring in a whole bunch of turkey vultures, and they're going to clean out that carcass, even when it's cold. Automobile collisions with animals. There's a lot of that happening. And of course, turkey vultures are taking the opportunity to eat from that. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, they are vulnerable. I have to admit, I have a shovel in my back of my car, and if I find roadkill and it's safe for me to do so, I will get out of my car, park on the side, and I will shovel that dead carcass over to the side, because it could mean a collision for a turkey vulture, and then they end up either dead or in a rehab center, or they become an ambassador bird for education purposes at like a raptor center. So just to give you a look at our numbers at Beamer, in 5 years, in 1980 to 1984, we would get about 606 birds. Now we're getting 6,600 for a 5-year average from 2015 to 2019. Shouldn't be 2020, but 2019. So 10-fold increase for this bird, and I'm sure it's still on the rise. The next one I want to talk about is the American kestrel, because this is a species of concern. And there are things that you can do personally to help this bird, which is why I chose it. This species is widespread across North America, but there are subspecies. So there are different concerns based on where they live. Since 1966, the broad view of this is that the species has declined at hawkwatches by over 50%, but it's much higher in certain areas, and that would be in the east. That's where the decline is the most. In 1985 to 89, we would get about 125 going through Beamer. Now we're getting, in 2015 to 2019, before the COVID, we would get about 45, so 1/3 of what we used to get in the late 80s. So you can see there is a trend in decline, population decline. So the question is why, and we're still learning why. We don't know for sure, but scientists believe exposure to pesticides is reducing nesting success. So the birds are just not as robust due to the pesticides. And of course, they're at the top of the food chain. So there is that accumulative effect of chemicals in their prey. Loss of old trees with cavities. They're a cavity nester. They need a hole in a tree, and they can't make their own hole. Woodpeckers make holes, and eventually those could be used by kestrels. But they need to have trees that are near open land, because they like to predate on insects and mice in the fields. Replacement of old barns is also an issue, because those old barns had nice little nooks and crannies where they could go in and have a nest. And the change in farming practices. We used to have hedgerows and trees between farming fields, and now the farming fields they're taking out the hedgerows and planting right up to the fence line. And fences are not available to a kestrel do not facilitate nesting spots for kestrels like a hedgerow with some old trees with maybe a nice hole in it for them. And interestingly enough, there's a new genetic study that just came out where they were looking at the genetic makeup of different species, and the eastern population. One of the hypotheses now is that the eastern population genetically is less adaptable to climate change. I'm not sure if that's been supported or not, but it is a theory that's out there as well. So something you can do to help this species. There are a lot of things that we can do in general to help save birds, and we can talk about that during question and answer period if you like, but I'm just going to focus on a couple for the American kestrel, and that is to put up a box. So if you have some land near where you live or on your property, or you know somebody who has the property that could accommodate a kestrel box, I would highly recommend you encouraging people to do this. You can just Google it online and it'll tell you the specs of how big the box should be. But generally, the box needs to be 10 to 30 feet up above ground. And you can see here, this one has a nice baffle on it to avoid, like raccoons or what have you, climbing up and predating on the chicks. And you want it facing southeast to avoid direct winds. This picture is from a friend of mine who has one of these boxes and four lovely, robust chicks inside. I also wanted to mention to you, just to finish before we have question period, is that I do run a Raptor ID course in the winter time, and it's a webinar series. It starts January 27th, and it's recorded. So if you can't make the night that I have my my course, you can watch it as a recorded one for those that you can't. They're usually on Mondays and Thursday nights and run through February and finish early March, just before, excuse me, the spring migration. It's $50, and 50% of the money from the course goes to the Hawkwatch. If you're interested in joining that, just nphawkwatch.ca is where you can get the information on how to sign up if you're interested. And I also like to thank my my photographers that provide photographs for these kinds of presentations and my course. And just to finish, I just wanted to ask if there were any questions. Thank you very much for having me again and allowing me to share this presentation with all of you.
Catherine, thanks so much. That's really a great presentation. Really didn't know so much about raptors, and you covered it all. Maybe I can kick the questions off and just ask you, how did you develop a passion for these birds? Where did it come from? Is there a raptor in your childhood?
No, actually, that would have been great if there was. But actually, when I retired, I started working for Conservation Halton at Crawford Lake and Mountsburg. And at Mountsburg, they have a raptor center. And I started becoming the guide where I take school groups around all of the raptors that were there and talking about these raptors. And I just fell in love with them, and also volunteered at the center itself, cleaning cages and learning about the birds and feeding them and things. And yeah, that just kicked it off for me.
That's great. Ellen, do you want to take over the Q&A?
Sure, yes. Catherine, that was a terrific presentation. I'm wondering if you could stop sharing for a moment, and then we would see the all our participants and people who want to raise their hands will be able to see that as well.
Okay. I think I have. Did I stop sharing?
Oh, okay.
I see everybody's name here, and you and Philip.
Okay. All right,
Yeah.
then maybe I'll try to do it from my end.
I'll ask another question while we're getting the
Sure.
techniques worked out. Catherine, you mentioned one of the raptors can swoop down at 350 kilometers an hour. That's rather incredible. I mean, that's amazing. You did mention the baffles and the nose, but how do they negotiate the air friction when they go that fast? How does it affect their bodies, and how do they how do they manage that?
Well, I think it's just because they turn into this sort of aerodynamic creature with the wings right tight up to the body. The peregrine falcon is just incredibly aerodynamic. in which case that's why he or she can manage those speeds. There is a really cool video out there about it too, where this guy he parachuted out of a plane, and he's also a falconer, so he had his peregrine falcon go down for some prey, and they measured the speed, and he was trying to go down with this bird. It's very entertaining to watch. So you could just Google that on YouTube, falconer speeding along with his peregrine falcon, and it'll probably pop up. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I'll just ask one more question. I'm really curious about this too. You mentioned the turkey vultures. I mean, they provide sanitation services by cleaning up a lot of carrion and preventing disease. What are some other types of ecological services that these birds provide to us?
I can't think of any others really, just over, besides that generic sort of cleanup crew side of
Right.
it. But I can mention what's happening now with the black vultures, which is quite interesting. Black vultures don't have that sense of smell, so their strategy is to follow turkey vultures, and that's why we're starting to see black vultures expand their range as well. They're just starting to go, oh, the turkey vultures are up here. Let's go see what they're getting. And they're even though they're a little smaller bird, than the turkey vulture, they're far more aggressive. So they'll push turkey vultures off of their carrion and just, elbow their way in, which is kind of interesting.
Are they actually coming into Ontario? There is one question about that. They are apparently in Pennsylvania and south of the border, but are you seeing more of them here in Ontario, the black vultures?
Yeah, so it used to be, I think 5 years ago, we'd get one every 2 or 3 years. And now we're getting one almost every year, sometimes 2 or 3. I see on the e-reader alerts, oh, black vulture seen at place X. So it's starting to happen, and I'm sure it's just going to become more because we're getting more turkey vultures too. It's just very interesting how certain species come here for one reason and another one comes in here because the other one's here.
That's great. Catherine, there's been a question too about vultures, about where they would nest, and I do have one just a city of Toronto experience, which I'm sure is not normal, but there were turkey vultures nesting at Bloor and Sherbourne at the intersection on the top of a tall building.
Wow.
And they apparently did this several years. I certainly saw them there. I don't know if they were successful, but it was right by the Don Valley,
Wow.
right by the viaduct. And so they had the whole valley there. But maybe you could tell us maybe a little bit more about where they would normally nest. Would they nest along cliffs or something?
Yeah, that's my experience is like Niagara Escarpment area. They just love the rocks and crevices there, and of course there's forest there too, so it's nice and protected. So I think that's generally where my experience is where they nest. That's incredible that they were on top of the building. Wow.
Yeah, it was a very odd thing to see. I'm wondering if you could also recommend a resource. I mean, you've
Mm,
mentioned a number of good, I think, websites and so on, but perhaps a book or
yes,
just
there's
something
there's a
that would
couple of
help the Ontario person who's getting to know raptors.
mhm. The best one, in my view, is called Hawks in Flight. That's the title. And the other one, if you really want to learn about identification in flight, I would go with the Crossley ID Guide. The
Okay.
Crossley ID Guide has a lot of photographs of different raptors in different light. So, and then there's, it's like you see them and then they mix up different species. And then you have the answers at the back. So you get to quiz yourself, and it provides you an opportunity to test yourself and also to gain some confidence in your identification, ability. Yeah, and it does use sort of I mean, they're dynamic when they fly, right? So what you want to do is sort of zone in on the postures that you see the most, right? Like the open soar, a glide from directly below, and maybe with them oncoming, what they look like. How are they holding their wings? Is it a V shape or is it flat? That kind of thing. And the Crossley ID really goes into detail on that. Whereas the hawks in flight will give you more knowledge about the species in general, where to find them, and then it'll also go into identification as well.
Right, right. And when you spell Crossley, that's Crossley?
Ley, yes.
Okay, very good. Excellent. This would also be a good time for you to just say again, describe your webinar again, and just, how people might connect with it, just to repeat that so people can grab that pen and paper if they're interested. And while you're grabbing those pens and papers, I will just say that there are also, for people who are in the Toronto downtown area and you're looking for an easy place in the Toronto area, there is of course the Hawk Hill at High Park. And in September, whenever there are southeasterly winds, is what I understand. I might have that wind direction wrong, but there are always volunteers there, and some are very well informed. And so just showing up and being curious is a good way of really getting to know the Toronto area hawks and learning from people who know a bit more. So now do tell us again about your webinar, etc.
Okay, so it starts January 27th. It's going to be running on Mondays and Thursdays. I think here are the dates. Mostly, there are a few Mondays that are not part of it, but it's usually Mondays and Thursdays. And they are always recorded, and it's live with me. So I will teach. What I do is I start with one genus and work my way through that genus. So for example, the Bootios. And when we're finished that genus, I will compare those species so that you can separate one from the other in flight. And then the next lesson will be another genus, and then we will go back and add that to the group and compare it against the ones that you've already learned. So we build the roster up and learn how to compare and contrast every species so that when you see something in the air, you can zone in on what to look for and how to separate it from all the others, that kind of thing. So it's building up those skills. And I like to put in a lot of quizzes so people get a chance to practice online. And then, of course, I always recommend that people go out in the field, because like book learning and webinars can take you to a certain level, but then it's about being out in the field and really seeing it for yourself, because there's also your own personal perception that comes into play. But this will help you with the terminology and the what to look for, and give you the basic terminology. When people say, oh, that's got a long tail, what does that mean? Relative to what, right? Like, so it kind of gives you that understanding.
Yeah, so it's just a practice is
Yeah.
what helps with it, as with everything. Yeah,
It's so true. Yeah, I have to mention, someone gave me this great analogy. You know how when you first meet somebody and you're struck by the way, say, their eye color or the way they talk or the way they move their hands when they talk. And then as you get to know that person and you get to know them really well, you can pick them out walking down the street at dusk because you recognize the way they walk, right? And it's that developing that familiarity. And it's the same thing with anything else with hawks in flight. It's just getting to know those species really well. And then it's like, oh yeah, I can tell that's an osprey or that's a harrier for sure, that kind of thing. It's just familiarity. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Catherine, for those who want to join one of your walking tours in Royal Botanical Garden, how do
Mhm.
they find out where and when the tours are? Would they be listed on the Botanical Gardens website, or can you provide us a list that we can distribute? How could we get that info out there? We'll get you some more.
Yeah. So if you go to the Royal Botanical Gardens website, they have a drop-down menu for courses and workshops, and that's where you'll find it. They put out the dates. There's myself and one other now that do the guided walks. Her name is Heather Hostin, and she's fantastic. And they put out the dates at the beginning of each season. So spring, summer, fall, and winter. And I believe the winter dates are coming out on November 8th. I should mention that they are sold out within 3 hours. So if you want to get out there, you got to get on the website right away and book yourself. But you can also go on the wait list now. So if somebody can't come to a date, then the RBG will look through the wait list and get someone else to come. So if you don't get in, like just go, put yourself on the wait list because chances are there will be openings that come up. But if you become a member of RBG, you will get a notification of when the course dates are coming up. And each date is independent of all the others. So you can just sign up for one, and it doesn't matter if you weren't there for other ones. It's not like a course where it's building up. It's just each is a bird walk, independent of all the other bird walks. And I offer 2 levels. There's beginner, and that's for people who aren't even familiar with, like, say, how to hold binoculars and find birds, how to use binoculars effectively. So I go through that at the beginning of every walk for the beginner level. But if you are familiar with using binoculars and your backyard species, I would recommend just coming to the next level, which is called Joy of Birding, because when we meet, we just go around the circle, introduce ourselves, and then we go out and bird right away. And it's for 3 hours. Yeah. And it does cost money to come to the walks, but there's a limit to the number of people that can come. I don't take more than 12 because I feel that for everybody to increase the chances of everybody seeing the bird that we're looking at, we can't have big numbers on the trail because invariably the person at the very back of the lineup, by the time they get up the trail to see the bird, it's gone, it's flown. And that's very disappointing, right? So,
Right.
it just increases the chances of seeing birds when it's a nice small group.
Great. Thanks very much.
You're
Ellen,
welcome.
any more questions?
No, I think there's been several thank yous, and we did have 56 people at the peak, so there's been a lot of interest here as well.
Yes.
And that's really terrific.
That's great. Catherine, want to really thank you for your presentation. It was really informative and has gotten a lot of us interested in a bird that we didn't know very much about. So thank you for that. And I'm sure some of our members are going to be seeking you out at the Botanical Gardens for those walks. That's great. Thanks.
Thank
Ellen,
you.
do you want to conclude with some announcements regarding upcoming TFN events, including our next lecture, that the Naturalist Next Door in Hamilton, which will take place in December?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So we were definitely have another program, another lecture program coming up, and December 1st, we will be featuring a conversation with the naturalists next door. And that's the Hamilton Naturalist Club, and they have been around for even longer than the Toronto Field Naturalists. So they're well over a century. And so Jen Baker, who is the general manager at Hamilton Naturalists, will be in conversation with Lynn Miller, our president, and it will be, we hope a sort of a friendly and mutually curious conversation about what makes these groups tick, and what we're aspiring to, what our challenges are, what our successes are. So, it'll be a I think illuminating for us all, and I hope you can all join. In February, we always, by long tradition, do not have a lecture at the beginning of January, so don't look for one. And but February 2nd, that happens to be World Wetlands Day, we are inviting the Toronto Zoo staff to give us a little talk about their Blandings Turtles Head Start program. And they'll tell you more about that. Essentially, it's a conservation program for a really lovely native turtle that is under quite vulnerable in Ontario. And we're always interested in more volunteers who can help us with the lecture team. There are lots of moving parts to what we do, and one big advantage of being on the lecture team is that you can help scope the frame and the focus of future lectures. We're certainly interested in people who could help us write up the reports for the newsletter. That would also be great. So do let us know if you're interested. I always like to focus on the walks that TFN offers in the coming month. And so what is still left to November, that has only just begun, but we still have a number of walks. We have one in the Rouge Park on November 7, but there's no TTC access for that one, so that's unusual. We have one November 9 at Todmorden Mills with some of the volunteers who have really made that a splendid wildflower preserve over the last 30 years. We have an overview of the Humber Arboretum, November 12. And then we have a couple of afternoon walks on Sunday afternoon, the 17th, Trinity Bellwood. That's a very urban location. And November 22nd, a Friday afternoon, Lambton Woods. And we also are looking at Prospect Cemetery towards the end of the month, a Wednesday. So pretty much any day of the week, there are TFN walks available to you. And do check them out on the members page. And I think that's it, Philip. And so thanks so much, everybody, for coming. And I hope it's been a good time for you.
That's great. Thanks again